Chapter 11 of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bologna Times. Camille by Alexandre Dumas Ville. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 11. At this point, Armand stopped. "Would you close the window for me?" he said. "I am beginning to feel cold. Meanwhile, I will get into bed." I closed the window. Armand, who was still very weak, took off his dressing gown and lay down in bed, resting his head for a few moments on the pillow, like a man who is tired by much talking or disturbed by painful memories. "Perhaps you have been talking too much," I said to him. "Would you rather for me to go and leave you to sleep? You can tell me the rest of the story another day. Are you tired of listening to it?" "Quite the contrary." "Then I will go on. If you left me alone, I should not sleep." "When I returned home," he continued, without needing to pause and recollect himself, so fresh were all the details in his mind, "I did not go to bed, but began to reflect over the day's adventure. The meeting, the introduction, the promise of Marguerite, had followed one another so rapidly and so unexpectedly that there were moments when it seemed to me I had been dreaming. Nevertheless, it was not the first time that a girl like Marguerite had promised herself to a man on the morrow of the day of which he had asked for the promise. Though, indeed, I made this reflection, the first impression produced on me by my future mistress was so strong that it still persisted. I refused obstinately to see in her a woman like other women, and, with the vanity so common to all men, I was ready to believe that she could not but share the attraction which drew me to her. Yet I had before me plenty of instances to the contrary, and I had often heard that the affection of Marguerite was a thing to be had more or less dear, according to the season. But, on the other hand, how was I to reconcile this reputation with her constant refusal of the young count whom we had found at her house? You may say that he was unattractive to her, and that, as she was splendidly kept by the duke, she would be more likely to choose a man who was attractive to her, if she were to take another lover. If so, why did she not choose Gaston, who was rich, witty, and charming, and why did she care for me, whom she had thought so ridiculous the first time she had seen me? It is true that there are events of a moment which tell more than the courtship of a year. Of those who were at the supper, I was the only one who had been concerned at her leaving the table. I had followed her. I had been so affected as to be unable to hide it from her. I had wept as I kissed her hand. This circumstance, added to my daily visits during the 2 months of her illness, might have shown her that I was somewhat different from the other men she knew, and perhaps she had said to herself that for a love which could thus manifest itself, she might well do what she had done so often that it had no more consequence for her. All these suppositions, as you may see, were improbable enough, but whatever might have been the reason for her consent, one thing was certain: she had consented. Now I was in love with Marguerite. I had nothing more to ask of her. Nevertheless, though she was only a kept woman, I had so anticipated for myself, perhaps to poeticize it a little, a hopeless love, that the nearer the moment approached when I should have nothing more to hope, the more I doubted. I did not close my eyes all night. I scarcely knew myself. I was half demented. Now I seemed to myself not handsome or rich or elegant enough to possess such a woman. Now I was filled with vanity at the thought of it. Then I began to fear lest Marguerite had no more than a few days' caprice for me, and I said to myself that since we should soon have to part, it would be better not to keep her appointment, but to write and tell her my fears and leave her. From that I went on to unlimited hope, unbounded confidence. I dreamed incredible dreams of the future. I said to myself that she should owe to me her moral and physical recovery, that I should spend my whole life with her, and that her love should make me happier than all the maidenly loves in the world. But I cannot repeat to you the thousand thoughts that rose from my heart to my head, and that only faded away with the sleep that came to me at daybreak. When I awoke, it was 2 o'clock. The weather was superb. I don't think life ever seemed to me so beautiful and so full of possibilities. The memories of the night before came to me without shadow or hindrance, escorted gaily by the hopes of the night to come. From time to time my heart leapt with love and joy in my breast. A sweet fever thrilled me. I thought no more of the reasons which had filled my mind before I slept. I saw only the result. I thought only of the hour when I was to see Marguerite again. It was impossible to stay indoors. My room seemed too small to contain my happiness. I needed the whole of nature to unbosom myself. I went out. Passing by the Rue d'Antin, I saw Marguerite's coupe waiting for her at the door. I went toward the Champs-Élysées. I loved all the people whom I met. Love gives one a kind of goodness. After I had been walking for an hour from the Marly horses to the Rond Point, I saw Marguerite's carriage in the distance. I divined rather than recognized it. As it was turning the corner of the Champs-Élysées, it stopped, and a tall young man left a group of people with whom he was talking and came up to her. They talked for a few moments. The young man returned to his friends, the horses set out again, and as I came near the group I recognized the one who had spoken to Marguerite as the Comte de G., whose portrait I had seen and whom Prudence had indicated to me as the man to whom Marguerite owed her position. It was to him that she had closed her doors the night before. I imagined that she had stopped her carriage in order to explain to him why she had done so, and I hoped that at the same time she had found some new pretext for not receiving him on the following night. How I spent the rest of the day I do not know. I walked, smoked, talked, but what I said, whom I met, I had utterly forgotten by 10 o'clock in the evening. All I remember is that when I returned home I spent 3 hours over my toilet, and I looked at my watch and my clock 100 times, which unfortunately both pointed to the same hour. When it struck 10:30, I said to myself that it was time to go. I lived at that time in the Rue de Provence. I followed the Rue du Mont Blanc, crossed the boulevard, went up to the Rue Louis le Grand, the Rue des Portes Mahon, and the Rue d'Antin. I looked up at Marguerite's windows. There was a light. I rang. I asked the porter if Mademoiselle Gautier was at home. He replied that she never came in before 11, or a quarter past 11. I looked at my watch. I intended to come quite slowly, and I had come in 5 minutes from the Rue de Provence to the Rue d'Antin. I walked to and fro in the street. There are no shops, and at that hour it is quite deserted. In half an hour's time Marguerite arrived. She looked around her as she got down from her coupe, as if she were looking for someone. The carriage drove off. The stables were not at the house. Just as Marguerite was going to ring, I went up to her and said, "Good evening." "Ah, it is you," she said, in a tone that by no means reassured me as to her pleasure in seeing me. "Did you not promise me that I might come and see you today?" "Quite right. I had forgotten." This word upset all the reflections I had had during the day. Nevertheless, I was beginning to get used to her ways, and I did not leave her, as I should certainly have done once. We entered. Nanine had already opened the door. "Has Prudence come?" said Marguerite. "No, madame." "Say that she is to be admitted as soon as she comes. But first put out the lamp in the drawing room, and if anyone comes, say that I have not come back and shall not be coming back." She was like a woman who is preoccupied with something, and perhaps annoyed by an unwelcome guest. I did not know what to do or say. Marguerite